What is the difference between an IEP and 504 plan? These documents are two very separate educational plans, and we'll go over some of the similarities and key differences on what you need to know as a school-based OT. Do these slides look familiar? Well, they should. We borrowed it from our differences between clinical and school-based OT video. Be sure to check that content out if you haven't yet. Let's quickly define the terms we're talking about today. Since IEP is an abbreviation, let's spell it out for you. I stands for individualized, E, educational, and P for program. We'll go over the actual parts of an IEP in a future video, so be on the lookout for that. The 504 plan is named after that specific section of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and we'll get into what that is in just a second. Starting with the similarities of an IEP and 504 plan, both documents are legal educational plans. The district has to abide by whatever is written in either plan. They are both legally binding educational plans that aid in the educational success of the student and protects the student's needs. Both plans do identify the student's needs or disability, and personalized supports are written into each plan. Both do have an evaluation process to identify the needs of the student in order to develop the plan, and at minimum, both plans should be reviewed at least once a year. Now to the important and key differences that make them very distinct and separate educational plans, starting with the different laws that govern each plan. The IEP is governed by IDEA, and the 504 plan is under the Rehabilitation Act. IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and this is federal special education law. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is, in contrast, a federal civil rights law. Another key difference between the plans is what each plan provides the student. The IEP provides specialized instruction, while the 504 plan provides for reasonable accommodations. The IEP provides the student with specialized instruction, or another term, specific designed instruction. The educational team identifies the adverse impacts of the student's education, identifies the specific needs, and how those needs are going to be met. The plan is specific, detailed, and very tailored to the student's needs to create an educational program. The 504 plan is not a program, but a plan that provides reasonable accommodations by removing barriers or making alterations that will assist the student in accessing their education. We're going to take a quick detour from our topic to go into a bit more detail on what is an accommodation and what is a modification. Accommodation and modification are not the same thing. They are not interchangeable terms in education. Once again, an accommodation is altering something or removing a barrier, using an interpreter for a deaf or hard of hearing student, providing instruction in Braille for the visually impaired student, allowing extra time on tasks or tests for students with motor or learning disabilities. No changes have been made to the curriculum or instruction, but how the student accesses the instruction. Modifications, on the other hand, is changing the content of what the grade level learning expectations are for the student, using a different reading or math program than grade level expectations, taking away word problems on a math test, and just completing straight up math computation instead. In short, an accommodation is changing how you learn, and modification changes what the student is expected to learn. Quite the tangent from our video topic, but we felt the need to clarify as the two often get interchanged. And another quick reminder about OT services under the IEP and 504 and how it's provided. We actually brought this up in our video about school-based and clinic OT. On an IEP, occupational therapy services cannot be the only service on the plan. OT cannot be a standalone service. OT services can be the only service listed on a 504. Back to our regularly scheduled program, another difference between the IEP and 504 is how a student qualifies for each plan. The IEP has very specific eligibility criteria a student must meet, while the 504 plan has a very broad definition of eligibility. To qualify for an IEP, a student must qualify under at least one of 13 very specific eligibility categories, each with its own inclusionary criteria. And very quickly, here are those 13 specific eligibility categories for special education. A student must have at least one of these to qualify for special education services. The process of how a student becomes eligible for special education will be in a future video, so be on the lookout for that as well. In contrast, the 504 plan has a very broad criteria to qualify a student. The law says the student must have an impairment that impacts a major life activity. You don't need a specific diagnosis to qualify. The criteria is very broad and vague. Another key difference is how long or the length of time each plan follows the student. The IEP is for any student at the age of 3 through 21 while they are a student of the school district. The 504 plan can follow the student from high school to college. At whatever age the IEP starts, the student can have the plan as long as they have continued eligibility for services through the age of 21. Once a student reaches high school, the student and family have the choice to take the high school diploma and graduate, or the student can stay with the school district and attend a transition program through the age of 21. You cannot reinitiate the IEP once the student takes that diploma. The 504 plan can follow the student to college, and the accepting college will review the student's plan and put in reasonable accommodations. The last major difference we want to bring up, and does drive us a bit bananas, is funding. There is reimbursement for special education services with an IEP, but there is no reimbursement for 504 plans. Both plans are at no cost to families, but the district can get funding for special education services, so why does this difference drive us bananas? When it's time for the team to determine which plan would benefit the student most and can be successful with, you will have those parents and advocates that will balk at districts giving out 504 plans instead of IEPs because of excuses like staff shortage or no room in the student's schedule to provide that many services, or because IEPs are more expensive for districts to implement than 504s, or whatever. Districts do not get funding for 504 plans but do get funding for IEPs, so why wouldn't districts qualify every student with an IEP? Because of the legal obligations every district has not to overqualify students whose needs can be met through a 504. Districts get dinged if they overqualify students for special education services. Districts get audited and will get penalized for overqualifying students. Needs drive services. If the student's needs can be met by a 504 plan, that's the obligation of the school district for that student. But if the student's needs are more substantial and cannot be met through a 504 plan, the team is then obligated to develop that IEP. These are some of the big and basic differences between the IEP and 504, and you can always research for more similarity and differences. And we have to mention that some of the educational terms we may use could be different than what you use in your district. Let us know in the comments below if you do use different terms and what those terms are, so that we as a school-based OT community can be aware when we are engaging with one another. Make sure you have one, not two different buckets for both your IEP and 504 students this school year.